Ornithology.
What a fine achievement for Cheltenham Town.
Hello and welcome to Ornithology, a podcast from the Robins Trust. My name's Jamie, I'm a Robins Trust board member. And if you haven't listened before, this is a podcast that I've set up to take a little look under the bonnet of the club and see how things work. If you're not a member of the Robins Trust, you can go to robinstrust.org/join and join for as little as £10 a year to get access to these episodes. If you are a member, these will be available through your Memberful platform. The links are on the website. I'll put the link below the show so you can find out how to access that. Thank you to everyone who's listened to the previous 5. This is the 6th episode and the final one of this run. In this episode, my guest is Paul Godfrey, who is the football secretary. He's also on the board of directors. He's really a person that holds so many strands of how the club work together. The conversation we have covers things like registering players, dealing with the kind of HR issues with them, dealing with disciplinary matters, and just everything that it takes to really put a game of football on from the admin sides. Complying with the requirements of the Football Association, complying with the requirements of FIFA for international clearances. I think it's a fascinating chat. It was great to speak to Paul. No more messing around. Here's Paul Godfrey. Trying to sort of piece the bits of the club together so that everyone can understand a bit more about how it all operates and the people involved. The work that you do as a football secretary obviously kept coming up, and that being the sort of beating heart of keeping the show on the road. So I just wanted to ask you about that, because it's not a role that I know a huge amount about. I'm sure a lot of people don't. So I just wondered if we could go through what it entails and what the day-to-day role is like, and then the things that you need to do over a season.
Yeah, sure. Well, it's different things at different clubs, really. It tends to be, particularly at the smaller clubs, it tends to be all sorts of different things thrown into the role. But I suppose the core parts of it, the traditional club secretary role, is around player registrations and fixtures, and also dealing with the football authorities, so the FA, the Football League, FIFA, County FA, everything that involves rules and regulations, that kind of stuff. There's an awful lot of it these days. Bigger clubs will have a team of people, probably, including a sort of senior football administrator. But as I say, at the smaller clubs, it tends to be one person, and that person will probably have bits of other work that they pick up along the way. I've been doing this a long time, so I've sort of collected various other jobs in one way or another. So there's bits of finance, bits of HR, stuff like that also come into it. And I also do all the registrations and admin stuff for the academy.
Yeah, that's even more broad then.
I mean, we have got somebody that does some of the general day-to-day admin, but I do the more meaty stuff, like making sure all of the academy players are properly registered and keeping them all up to date, because obviously there's quite a bit of value involved with some of those registrations. And then there's other things like going to Football League meetings and representing the club in those sorts of things. There's plenty to keep you busy, put it that way.
So we're a voting member of the Football League. I assume probably not the FA as well. I'm not quite sure how that's structured. But are you the person that votes for Cheltenham Town in those things?
Yeah, full member of the FA as well. So if there's a vote that's required, AGM or an EGM, then we would also vote in that. But more commonly, it's the Football League. Yeah, I mean, I don't make the decision on how to vote. The board would. Anything that's important or might be a bit contentious or requires a bit of discussion, the board would decide how we're going to vote. But in terms of actually physically casting the vote, that would most often be me, either in person at a meeting or by proxy.
And I guess just on that subject, how often are the Football League meetings that you have to attend?
There's about 3 or 4 a year of the main meetings, but then there are also other ones. There's finance meetings, there's secretaries meetings. There's not all of them these days. Not all of them are in person, thankfully. Probably there's at least one a month, probably of different things you have to go to. During COVID, they were changing the regulations every few days, so we were always having to vote on things because it was territory that nobody had ever gone into before.
Of course.
So that was a very intense time. But yeah, it's quite a big part of it, I suppose. The amount of interaction you have to have with the league and the other clubs.
And going back to the issues with the player registration, I assume players have to be registered as part of the squad at the start of every season or once they're sort of signed on. How does the process match day when you register the squad? Like, at what point do you have to have the first 11 and the substitutes listed, and where does that get sent? And yeah, what the elements involved in getting the team on the pitch?
Yeah, there's an online system there where there's an online portal where you basically put down the team. When you register all the players at the start of the season, as you say, we've also got a thing which the league brought in a few years ago to try and, it was one of the measures designed to try to control costs, and that is the squad lists. So there's a limit on the number of players you can actually have. So any player, in order to play in a game, a player's got to not only be registered, but also has got to be part of the squad list. Then you've also got to have a certain number of homegrown players, a certain number of club-developed players. There are different rules for covering under 21 players. And then there's different, when you get to the disciplinary side of it, there are different ones for the different competitions now, whereas it used to be if you got 5 yellow cards in any competition, you'd be suspended for the next game. But now it's separate in the FA Cup and the EFL Trophy and things like that. So it's a bit complicated, if I'm honest. And there's lots of ways, and you've also got to register squad numbers. So there's lots of ways that clubs can fall foul of the rules and get fined.
Yeah, I mean, you do occasionally hear about it happening, less in
you've also got to register. We've even now got to register the colours for each game at least 7 days in advance. So we've got to decide when we play away, which kit we're going to play in and things like that. So yeah, there's all of that goes onto the online portal.
Does the online portal do any of the admin for you? As in, does it flag up if you've selected a player who's serving, I don't know, a 3-match ban and you've only given them 2 games off? Or is this all reliant on an incredibly well-organised spreadsheet at your end?
Well, a bit of both, actually, because the Football League, of course, they don't have access to the FA's disciplinary database. So it would flag up if a player wasn't registered or wasn't named on the squad list, but it wouldn't flag up if a player is suspended. So you have to keep your own records about who's suspended and which games they miss, that sort of thing.
And do you deal with things like, I mean, I don't know how this works. A lot of my knowledge is going to come from Football Manager, so it could well be very incorrect. But things like players' bonuses or agreements with their agents or things like the insurance when they're injured and things like that, does that all come through your patch?
Yeah, that's all me as well. Yeah, so you keep a record. I mean, because I do the payroll as well, so in that sense, it's quite easy. I just keep a record of everything that's owed, and then put it through at the end of each month on the payroll system. And so what was the other thing? Oh yeah, agents' payments as well. Yeah, and the insurance, the medical scheme. I administer that with the head of medical, Gavin, which we do that. And also the doping control. So we have to give information to the league regarding who's in our squad and where they're training, when they're training, and all their home addresses, so that they can be tested.
Okay, and I assume professional footballers, the doping control, turn up at their house on a morning and just knock on the door.
Yeah, could do.
So that is a lot, because again, that seems to be a thing that in athletics and possibly cycling as well, you hear people falling foul of that because they have updated the system to say that they'll be in this country at this time or whatever.
Yeah, that does happen. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't because I've not worked in another sport, so I don't know how often they get tested in those other sports. But certainly, the most common form of testing in football is for them to come to a match or a squad training session. But the club or indeed the individual player can fall foul of it if they haven't updated the information. One of the most common problems is if a player is injured and has gone, say he's gone off to do some rehab on his own, or he might have gone off to an appointment with a specialist or something, and he's forgotten to tell the FA that he's not going to be on site. That counts as a strike against you. And if you get 3 of those in a 12-month period, then you can be charged with misconduct.
very high stakes stuff, isn't it? I mean, I understand why for this sort of sporting integrity, but
Yeah.
in terms of registering players at the start of the season, you say you've got the online system. When you bring a player on, how much information do you get about their kind of history? I'm sure you do some due diligence and things like that, but do you get a kind of dossier that's got things about their disciplinary record, their medical issues previously and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, not all of that comes through me. These days, I mean, it used to be the manager that would do a lot of the recruitment, but nowadays recruitment itself is such a big job that we've now got 2 full-time people who actually work on the nuts and bolts of all the discussions in advance with the player and the agents and the clubs regarding which players we want to bring in. When we get closer to a transfer or a registration coming to fruition, so to speak, I then get told, what essentially the terms are, which I then have to put into the contract. I mean, there have been times in the past where I've done some of that stuff myself, but thankfully, to say, we've now got 2 full-time people that handle most of it. So for me, it's a case of getting the paperwork ready and getting all that into a point where it can be signed and registered. The medical side of it, the head of medical would liaise with his opposite number at players' previous clubs to talk through the medical history, any particular injuries or treatments, that kind of stuff. And I would also find out about any outstanding suspensions. I mean, Curtis Davis, for example, when he signed for us, he had a 1-match suspension held over from last season, so he couldn't play in the first match of this one.
So I guess, that's obviously important to know. You'd like to think you wouldn't miss that and put someone on the field, but it sounds like there's sort of systems in place to stop that from happening. In terms of managing players' disciplinary matters, things like the decision to appeal sending off, what's the process for that? Because sometimes it feels like you watch replays of things on iFollow and think like, there's definitely a case to be made for that. So what's your thinking and the club's thinking behind whether or not to try to get things looked at again?
The wrongful dismissal ones, where you think you might have a chance of getting a red card overturned, it's difficult to do. They will only go on the video. So you could write chapter and verse, they'll completely ignore it. It only goes on the video. They've got a panel of 3 people, one of them probably be an ex-player, one of them an ex-referee, and then there'll be a chairman panel who will also have a football administrative background or playing background, and they'll just look at it, and the burden of proof is quite high. They have to decide whether the referee has made a serious and obvious error in issuing the red card. So the definition, for example, of serious foul play is a tackle which is careless, reckless, or uses excessive force. So the video has to prove beyond any doubt a tackle wasn't careless, reckless, or excessive force. Because a player could actually completely miss his opponent, but because the tackle is so forceful, if it forced him to jump out of the air and land into the air and land awkwardly, it could still be classed as a red card. When we've won them in the past, it's usually been on the basis that that there's been no contact made, or that that there was a handball, that it was impossible for the player to get his arm out of the way, that sort of thing. In recent years, we've got quite a good record of winning appeals, but that's mainly because we've only gone for the ones that we think we've got any sort of chance of winning. Because the other problem is if you appeal a red card and it's a frivolous appeal, then you can get an extra game added to the suspension.
There's quite a lot of subjectivity to that, but I could see why you have to have that sanction in place to stop clubs just deluging.
Yeah. I mean, there was a case a couple of years ago. There was a club, lower division club, they had a big game against a Premier League team in the FA Cup, and the player didn't want to miss the cup tie, and he persuaded the club to appeal a red card when they had no chance of winning. They gave him an extra ban for that. That's
pretty strategic. That's like the thing about the players getting bookings in the run up to Christmas to try and get the game suspension.
Well, I wouldn't comment on that. I was funny enough. I was talking to one of our academy coaches who's involved with the team in the Hellenic League, Step 5 of non-league, and he was telling me that one of their players had to miss Saturday because it was his stag do, and he was on 4 yellow cards. So he tried to get booked so that he would be suspended for the game when it was his stag do.
I mean, that raises an interesting thing about how football players are in a very specific, the playing staff in general, are in quite a specific place regards the normal HR and employment arrangements that you would have. I assume that there's not annual leave that players could take on a match day or something like that, but there must be an annual leave entitlement, or is it just that the pre-season is that?
Yeah, that's a good point. And you're right, it's completely different to normal working patterns and practices. The reason for that is because the standard players' contract is the result of a collective bargaining agreement between the various authorities, the FA, the Premier League, the Football League, and the PFA, the Players' Union. And between them, they come up with the wording of the standard players' contract, which basically, it means that once the season's finished, the players get a good few weeks break. But then once they're back in for pre-season training, then that's it. They're there for the duration.
Well, I guess other than sort of illness and injury, they would have to have a very good reason to not be there on a Saturday from 3 till 5.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. But obviously, that's my example of the club in the Hellenic League. That wouldn't apply at that level.
Do you help out with things like accommodation and things like that? It's particularly when a player moves in, but sort of the young players, people needing to have somewhere to live around Cheltenham. Is that in your sort of department?
I do get slightly involved with it. We've got to deal with a local hotel partnership with the local hotel so I sort of manage that one. But then that's for when players first come in, and they literally turn up and they've got nowhere to go. We put them in the hotel for a little bit. But then some of the other staff, the recruitment staff, and also we've got Richard Cox, our player care manager. Between them, they will liaise with letting agents, with younger players, with host families who look after them, that sort of thing. So they would tend to deal with the accommodation. It can be quite a busy time, at the start of the season, with players coming in and finding somewhere for them to go and what have you.
And organising away travel and the sort of logistics of fixtures. I mean, I guess that's a thing I often think about when it comes to the football secretary side of things, club secretary. So when at the start of the season, do you get the initial fixture list that's been churned out by the famous fixture computer that has a way of stitching up every single club in the country? Do you get that list and then go through it with a fine-tooth comb and suddenly work out where, I don't know, Forest Green are already at home or things like that? Or do you provide information before the fixtures are put together? I mean, how does that work? Yeah,
we provide information to the league around about March time, including any dates where we can't play. So, for example, for us, that's during the November meeting and the National Hunt Racing Festival. So, we physically couldn't play a game. I think we were due to have a game during the March festival this year, but we moved it. It was Charlton at home. The league knew that we couldn't play, so they were fine for us to move the game. But it was just a sort of vagary of, as you say, the fixture computer, that it happened to give us a game that week. Obviously, if anyone that's been around Cheltenham during race week knows it would be impossible to play a game at the same time. But with regard to the away games, these days we go through an agency, a hotel booking agency, which helps us to find the right places. Although we still do quite a lot of work on it ourselves, because we have specific requirements and particular ways that we like to do the away matches. I tend to look for specific hotels in particular locations. It helps that I've got pretty good knowledge of UK geography, having been to in my time, I think I worked out the other day, I'd been to well over 1,000 Cheltenham Town away matches. So I know every ground, every motorway, every hotel that we're likely to go to. So some of them are easy, and some of the places you go, they've only got one hotel, really. There's only one place that can realistically look after a football team. Yeah,
I imagine there's some proprietors in Barrow, as an example, who maybe do fairly well out of...
Yeah, and so generally for away games, we don't travel, and we don't have that many overnight ones, but we'll always stop. The team will leave a lot earlier than, say, for example, the supporters coach will do. And it will go to a hotel for to give the players a meal before the game, so that they get the preparation right in terms of the nutrition intake that they need for the match, and they can also receive any sort of last minute treatments or massages or strap-ins that they need from medical people. They can there'll be a meeting with the manager where they go through sort of last minute points and bits of information, and then I'll be around. I'll sort out any tickets that the players need, that sort of thing, and we'll get the kit delivered down to the ground ready for the players to turn up about an hour and a half before the match.
Do the club take their own food for the lunch and things, or do you rely on what's locally produced?
Well, as I say, we go to a hotel and we have a standard menu that we get served when we go to the hotel for the pre-match meal. Midweek games long. If it's a long trip on a midweek or a long trip on a Friday, say for example we've got Carlisle later in the season, then we'll take food for the players to have on the way for a particularly long trip if it's sort of over 3 hours. And then after the game, we normally we'll get some food delivered after the game. Normally be like pizzas or went to Blackpool last week, so it's fish and chips as it was the seaside.
Do the players get to go and train when they turn up there, say on a Saturday fixture? Would they do any training in the morning, or it's all match day by that point? It's conditioning and then the match later.
Yeah, they wouldn't generally train on the day of a game unless it was if you had a long distance midweek game. You might just do some real light training in the morning, just some set pieces or something like that. But generally speaking, you would train on a Friday and then travel either Friday afternoon or on a Saturday morning. Again, for some of the long distance ones, sometimes you might try and borrow a training venue somewhere on the way. There's kind of clubs will be often quite good at helping each other out. Sometimes we have people that train here if they're on the way down to Bristol Rovers or something like that. And we might do a reciprocal arrangement with them to train at their training ground if we're playing, I don't know, Carlisle or somewhere in the northeast.
One of the other things I wanted to ask about was the work that is required around players going on international duty, which in a lot of ways is a nice problem to have, I guess, that players are getting that experience. But are there particular steps that you have to take with the federations regarding the teams? How much advance warning do you get that players are going to be picked? And when it comes to negotiating whether to rearrange a match, how do the steps for that work?
There's strict FIFA regulations covering call-up of players for international duty. I mean, basically, if a player gets called up and he wants to go, then you have to let him go. There's no, don't have any say in it, really. But we get the level of notice you get does depend on the country doing the calling up, I have to say. The home nations are very good. You know, we've got a goalkeeper with Northern Ireland and 2 players with Wales under 21s, and you always get loads of notice, loads of information, loads of detail. So it's fine. And the FA as well. When we had recently had Tom King called up for England under 18s, and we got a sort of pre-notification that he was under consideration, and then we got the full squad through when he has actually called up. So that tends to be quite a few days before it's made public. So with the information's embargoed, we're not allowed to tell anybody that a player's called up until they release it to the press. But we'll generally will know. So what we can then do, if we get 3 players called up and we've got all the information from the relevant FAs, as I say, some of the countries are better at communicating than others. Once you've got it all, then you can go to the Football League and ask for a game to be postponed if you've got 3 or more called up.
And do you need to, just trying to think about how, when players are sort of returning and things, are you involved in the travel arrangements? Not necessarily booking it for them, but for example, I think did Cam Pepion went and played in Tajikistan, I'm going to say, for the Australia under-23s. Did the club put anything in place about the timeframes they would expect it would take for a player to come back and just say, we need to get you back in training? Or do you say, well, that's obviously quite logistically a tricky trip and we'll see you when you make it back in reasonable time? Again,
that's covered by the FIFA rules. The players have got to be back with their clubs within a certain time frame. But as you say, depending on where in the world it is, it's easier than others. The Wales lads have got a couple of games in Newport, I think, so that shouldn't be too difficult. Bonzi, of course, has been over to the Caribbean, so sometimes with some of the places that Guyana play, there are no direct flights back, so you have to go somewhere else before you come back to the UK, so that can take a bit longer. But countries know what the regulations are. They know they have to get the players back to us as soon as they can afterwards. But sometimes it can be a bit of an issue. Players maybe not getting back for training on the Thursday or coming back very late on the Wednesday and not being able to train on the Thursday. So it can be a bit of a logistical issue for clubs.
I don't know if there's anything else that you thought it might be useful for supporters to know about the side of the work that you do.
As I say, it just covers all of that stuff. It's when my children play just in local football, and some of the things that you have to do as a secretary just for a local team, registering players, that kind of stuff, and speaking to the referee and giving him the date of the game and the venue, and that it's exactly the same at our level. I have to later on today, I'll get the referee's appointments through for the West Ham under-21s game, and I'll have to send him our pack of information, just in the same way that you would do if you were organising a grassroots game. But obviously there's a whole load more stuff on top of it as well. There is, in one of my sort of, not complaints I suppose, but certainly in the last few years, the level of regulation that's come into football is really heavy. It's really increased. I've noticed it. And there was a huge difference as well between that year when we went into the National League and then coming back into the Football League again. You know, the workload that National League was very, very different because the Football League employs 60 plus people, I think it is. You know, they've got the resources to police all of the regulations. So you have to be absolutely right on top of everything, and you know, they do communicate with you a lot and remind you about all of the different things you've got to do, and there are lots of different initiatives that they like clubs to get involved in. So it's the workload never reduces, put it that way.
Oh, I'm sure.
There's always plenty going on.
Thank you to Paul for joining me, and thank you for listening. Thank you again for listening to all the previous episodes. It's the end of this run, but I've got a few ideas about things that are coming up. And there are just some other things that we can do to kind of continue this series as a kind of look at the structure of the club and how it all works. If you enjoy listening to podcasts about Cheltenham Town, check out the Robins Report. Here's the host, Owen Knight, to give you a bit of a rundown about what that's all about.
Hello, my name's Owen, and I'm the host of the Robins Report podcast. Catch us on your podcast platforms as I dissect everything CTFC with guests. We're very proud to be CTFC's longest serving and only weekly podcast dedicated to the Robins. Hope to have you listening soon. Thanks for listening. And as always, up the town.
Yeah, go and check it out. The Robins Report is great for your sort of rolling news provider on our football club. I know we're entering a quiet time now with the summer, but I think there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes, and there's going to be some fascinating discussions on the Robins Report. As I say, I've got some ideas bubbling away for things that are coming up. I'll let you know. We'll talk about them on social media, and I'll let Robins Trust members know if and when things come up. Thank you for listening. Enjoy the close season. Have a great summer. My name's Jamie. This has been an Unsound production for the Robins Trust. Okay, one more thing before I go. If you have enjoyed listening to Ornithology, you may, and I know there's no guarantee, you may be interested in listening to another podcast that I do. I do a podcast called Unsound Methods, which you can find in all the usual podcasting places. That's freely available. You don't need to be a member of the Supporters Trust to get hold of that. And it's a podcast where I and another writer of literary fiction speak to writers who are just doing interesting things, using interesting techniques, approaches, just have a different way of looking at the world. We have spoken to most recently Bill Drummond. An earlier one from this year would be David Shields, who's doing some really interesting stuff with non-fiction. Previous guests include Olga Tokarczuk, who won the Nobel Prize 4 years ago, I think. We've spoken to Emma McBride, winner of the Goldsmiths Prize, quite a few Goldsmiths Prize winners or nominees, Booker Prize winners. If you're interested in any kind of creative practice, you might find it interesting. Thought I'd mention it. Something for the summer. Talk to you all later.
Are my methods unsound?